Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We're talking with award-winning author Dan Hendrickson with interviewer Burke Allen. So, Burke, take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our Big Time Talker podcast. And today it's a special simulcast with our friends from Headline Books and their Zoom into Books online video stream. So you can watch us, you can listen to us, and catch us on social media too. For more information, check out zoomintobooks.com. And thanks to our show sponsor, speakermatch.com, the world's largest online virtual speakers bureau. If you're a speaker and you're looking for places to talk, or if you're a meeting planner, you need a great speaker, you can find one another at speakermatch.com. And today on our Big Time Talker podcast, award-winning author, multi-award-winning author, Dan Hendrickson is our guest. He has a brand new book called Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean. And as we do this show live, it is frigid and cold across much of the lower 48. So a nice Caribbean jaunt with a pirate princess sounds like a good thing. That's why Dan Hendrickson is here. Dan, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks, Burke. Glad to be here.
I've got to ask you, I read up on you and saw that you grew up in Sheridan, Wyoming. How does a
Mhm.
kid from Wyoming get into writing pirate adventures?
Well, I'll tell you, my father was an English professor, and he was probably the most prolific reader I have ever been around. He'd read two, three books a week. And so he got my brother and I really involved with reading. And some of his favorite books were like C.S. Lewis, Horatio Hornblower,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, Robert Louis Stevens, Treasure Island, those kinds of things. So I read all those books growing up. Plus, I used to watch a lot of movies too. I watched Captain Blood with Errol Flynn, Treasure Island also.
Sure.
And I just love pirate Caribbean stuff. And I love the English Navy and I love the whole hierarchy that went on back then in the 17th and the 18th centuries. And it's just great stuff. It's exciting to me. So it was pretty easy to get into Brandy's and all the pirate adventures that she went through.
I've always thought it was fascinating about male authors who write strong female characters or female authors who write strong male characters. How do you do that? How does that work in your head? And do you have maybe your wife or another female beta reader make sure you get it right? How does that work?
Well, Burke, I have two daughters, and they're both a couple of powerhouses. My youngest daughter, she's 25. She's going into law school. Her
Wow.
name is Donna, and I actually dedicated the first Brandy book to her. And my next oldest daughter, she's 30, and she's an APC6 reporter in Philadelphia, Becca Hendrickson. And my daughters, along with my son also, but we were talking about females, my daughters have been my inspiration for my female protagonists throughout a bunch of my books. And I just see them as heroes. And I try to put a lot of their personalities and their characters into some of my females. So it's pretty easy to transition to writing about female heroes.
Dan Hendrickson is our guest today on the Big Time Talker podcast and Zoom into Books. This is the second Brandy book. As you mentioned, the first one was Brandy, Ballad of a Pirate Princess. It was a bestseller and award winner. The new book, though, this Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean, if folks check out that book, do they have to have read the first one to kind of pick the story up, or do they stand alone?
Well, no, I mean, they do stand alone. I would suggest reading both books, but you could read either one. There is a synopsis of the first book in the second book to help people keep up. But no, I think you could read either one first and you'd be fine.
What's this new one about?
The new one about is I got to give you a little synopsis in the first one. Brandy met and fell in love with a man named John Edwards, who was the first lieutenant, or in English, they say lieutenant, of a man
Lieutenants.
named, yeah, lieutenant. Yeah, that's English. And he was a very famous captain that he was under in the English Navy that was an abolitionist after he retired or semi-retired. And so his name was Captain Arthur Joshua, and him and Captain or Lieutenant Edwards at the time came into Brandy's establishment as a couple of patrons. Now, Brandy was hiding out in Jamaica from the English authorities because her parents were notorious pirates. They were caught by an English admiral. They were executed. And she had to get out of there before they caught her too when she was 15 years old. But she fell in love with this guy, John Edwards. She ended up at the end of the book having to rescue him from pirates. And they had Captain Joshua gifted Edwards with a ship called the Morning Star. And that was the ship they used in their abolitionist efforts. Now, what I found lately is there's not a lot of people in the United States, at least, that know about the abolitionist efforts that went on in the Caribbean back in the days before the Civil War.
Yeah, this is all new to me.
Yeah.
So this is a real thing. This is not something you made up.
No, it's based on that. Yeah. So these and a lot of these guys were retired English Navy people that, you know, the slaves were freed in England in 1831 by Prince William. So, and Prince William was called the Sailor King because he was an admiral in the English Navy before he had to go home and take over the crown because his brother died. And so one of the first things he did through Parliament and stuff is he got the slaves completely freed in the British Empire. A lot of the English Navy were very highly in support of him, and so a lot of them in the Caribbean, when they retired and stuff, they started the abolitionist movement. Well, that's what John Edwards and Arthur Joshua were doing. Well, once John married Brandy, she got involved with him. Now she was raised as a pirate. She decided she wanted to support his efforts. So Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean, starts out with Brandy and John, and they have 2 kids, and they're in the Caribbean. They're based in Jamaica, but they go out and they come to the shores of the United States, like Louisiana and Florida, and they pick up groups of runaway slaves and they take them to the Caribbean somewhere where they can find a maroon that can support them. And that's where we get the word maroon. Maroon is from settlements that were made in the Caribbean of, runaway slaves where they could go and settle. And they were actually supported by the natives. And that's how we got a lot of our African-American community in the Caribbean from runaway slaves that were freed by the abolitionists. So Brandy and her husband are going along that. Now, in my book, I have a lot of martial arts and stuff in there. Brandy was trained by a Shaolin priest by the name of Zhang Yong. And he came to the Caribbean on some kind of a penitence. And he found Brandy and trained her to earn what he calls the Master Swords. The Master Swords are 2 swords that are made by the Shaolin Order. And she has to train for years in order to receive the privilege of using them. Well, she does get them in the first book. In my second book, she is on a mission in Louisiana. And they find out that Arthur Joshua's brother has died and left him the whole control of this big, huge shipping yards, which is the biggest weapons manufacturer in the world. Well, there are people inside the English Empire, the British Empire, that are trying to steal this from him. And what they need to do is get an heir back to England in order to claim all this company. Well, the thing is that the people in England, they hire somebody called the Jaded Empress, who is a notorious pirate from the South China Sea, to come down and kill Arthur's heir. And so all these, Arthur's heir and everybody, they're all connected with Brandy and her family. So while Brandy and John are in Louisiana trying to help these freed slaves get off this island and get back to Jamaica or someplace in the Caribbean where they could be settled, this Jaded Empress comes into Jamaica and she kidnaps Brandy's children and the heir to the Joshua shipyards, and she takes them to La Plata in South America, and she says, "You got to come and you got to face me to get these," because I don't want to give too many spoilers for the book, but the Jada Empress is the niece of Zhang Yong, Brandy's teacher. And she wants to kill Brandy because Brandy was the only one that Zhang's ever trained that received the Master Swords. And so it all culminates in a big face-off between Brandy and this Jaded Empress down in South America, where Brandy has to fight this girl to, get her kids back and reclaim, the Master Swords that she stole from her master. So hope I made sense there.
A lot happening in Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean.
Yeah. So, and at the end of the book, Dame is the English title of a woman who is knighted by the Queen. So that's kind of a foreshadow of what's going to happen by the end of the book. But Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean.
That's the brand new book from Dan Hendrickson. You can visit him online at danehendrickson.com and find out about Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean, and all his other books. And of course, they're available at Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere by name. So you mentioned martial arts, and that's kind of an interesting thing to put into a swashbuckling pirate adventure. It's kind of different and unexpected, but as I read up on you, you have a pretty big martial arts background. Tell me about that.
I started in when I was in junior high, I started taking judo classes. And then in high school, I got involved with boxing and wrestling. And then in college, I went to the community college in Casper. It was an offshoot of the University of Wyoming. And it was like 1981, 82. A man named by the name of Bill Shaw moved from Oregon to Wyoming to open up a karate school. Now, he was kind of a big thing in the karate world. I mean, back then in the 70s and the early 80s, he was one of the innovators along the lines of like Bruce Lee and some of the other guys that brought some new thinking to the martial arts field. And he was one of those guys.
Wow.
And so I started studying martial arts under him. And I got up to my high brown belt with him in the early 80s before I went on to another college. Well, I kind of lost touch with him after that. But come to find out that in the later 80s and the 90s, he became a Hollywood stuntman, fight choreographer, and all kinds of things with Hollywood. He's been in movies like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles back in
Oh
the 80s.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
He
Sure.
helped choreograph some of those movies. He's been involved with Sylvester Stallone in a movie called Get Carter. I don't know if you remember that
Saw
one.
that movie, yeah.
Yeah, and he's been involved with Billy Zabka in some movies back in the 90s. And so him and I reconnected a few years ago. And, you know, I'd also gotten involved with some Taekwondo down in Nashville, Tennessee. Then right here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I live now, I got involved with some Tang Soo Do, and I got my black belts in both of those. So I just been involved with martial arts off and on most of my life. And when I started writing, I started remembering all the different, we call them one steps or scenarios that we do where we teach people how to defend themselves from a different attack. And it's like it's move by move. You have to write it out like you give these kids these workbooks that they use in a karate class. And we write out the how to perform the move. And I thought, man, this would be really cool if I could just use it in a book because it's really descriptive. And
Sure.
so when I started writing, I just started using these one steps to describe my fight scenes. And when I started doing it, I started getting a lot of positive feedback. They say, "Oh man, I can visualize this fight scene just move by move. It's just working so well." And I'm like, "Yeah, you just take the arm, you pull it out, you put your other arm underneath, you pick them up, you take your hip and you shove it into their hip, and you pick them up off the ground and you twist your body, you throw them down, and then you describe that what it's basically it's called a Hiroshi throw. It's very simple." To say, oh, he just took his arm and threw him down, but to give each movement helps everybody see it. And so I just used those one steps as to describe the movement, and I kept it up, throughout all the books. But that's how I incorporate martial arts in there. And it was actually Bill Shaw that when last time I talked to him, he said, "Dan, you need to write a book that's got a lot more martial arts in it."
Of course
He
he
said,
did.
"I'd really love to see that." And I go, "Well, sure, I can do that." And so I wrote Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean. And there's a lot of martial arts. You have Shaolin Priest, you have ninja, you have a lot of stuff going on there. And so I put a lot more fight scenes in it and stuff. And I dedicated the book to him. So he's going to get a copy here pretty soon of it. He doesn't know it's dedicated to him yet because the book just came out. But
Well, that's
as soon as,
fantastic.
yeah,
Take care of your mentor there.
there you
Uh,
go.
the book is Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean. It's brand new from very prolific author Dan Hendrickson. You visit Dan online at danehendrickson.com. He's written a bunch of books about a bunch of different stuff. Um, I want to ask you one more question about martial arts since you've done it at a pretty high level. First of all, I think you could probably snap my neck like a chicken bone, so I want to take it easy with you. Um, what do people get wrong about martial arts from what they see in movies like your friend Bill has done or in TV? What do they get wrong about it?
I think the biggest thing that people get wrong is something that Yoda said. and that is that size matters not. Um, I think that martial arts can prepare an individual to handle somebody else that might be a little bigger than them. I know that, when we teach girls martial arts, that we can teach them how to handle, maybe throw a guy that maybe weighs 50 or 100, even 100 pounds over more than they weigh, just because, your legs are a lot more powerful than your body. And if you can use your legs to pick somebody up off the ground and throw them down, and like that move I just described, the Ogoshi
Sure.
throw, you know, so there's a little bit of truth to that, but like a 5 foot 5 inch guy going up against somebody that's 6'6" and weighing 350 pounds.
They
Good
might
luck.
have a bad day.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you get lucky, maybe you get a good shot into a really sensitive area of the body, and you could do that. But it's you know, in fact, I just heard Michael J. White talk about this on an interview a few weeks ago, and he said, I have profited on the illusion that people think that I can take on attackers much larger than me, or several attackers at once, to come out completely victorious and unscathed. He says, I'm an actor, and I'm a choreographer and all that. So I profited on that illusion. But he says, in real life, you got to approach it another way. And so I think that's the biggest thing people get wrong. Martial arts do help you to defend yourself, and there's a lot of practical stuff there, but you're not going to walk into a gang of 6 people with weapons and do what you see on TV.
Right.
You
What
know,
about the popularity, and it's only got more popular because President Trump's involvement with Dana White, and of MMA and UFC. As a martial arts guy, how do you feel about that bringing all those disciplines together?
I think that's exactly what Bill Shaw and Bruce Lee and everybody else was trying to do in the 70s, and it finally took hold. There's so many things from each discipline that you can profit from. The whole wrestling aspect of MMA is it's profound. It really has helped a lot of people defend themselves a lot better. Because I got a friend out in Colorado, Troy Miller. In fact, he's got a quote on my book. He owns a big martial arts studio, and he's also a stuntman, Hollywood choreographer. And he says one of the two things that he teaches his guys, so that they can actually defend themselves, is a little bit of, groundwork, or, wrestling really. And another one is boxing, how to use your fists. But that's a whole different subject. But, it's the mixing of them all that really helps. And I think it's just the natural, the evolution of martial arts has gone into the MMA. Now, there are some stuff that has been forgotten. There's a lot of technical stuff that they don't include. Like, one of the things I was just talking to Bill Shaw about a while back was that, one of the advantages of using judo is how hard you throw your opponent on the floor and just knock the wind out of him. And he says he doesn't, he's disappointed he doesn't see that taught more. That, even in these MMA fights, don't just throw them, slam them down on the ground, so that they, you knock the wind out of them, you can get on there and do something. He said he had taught military guys, in training and stuff, how to do that. And he said he got a feedback from a guy that was over in Afghanistan, and he'd come into a hostile situation, and he was attacked by this guy when he went through a door. And he just remembered what Bill told him about slamming him down and take him right through the floor. And this was an enemy combatant that he was able to disarm and then just knock him out by throwing him on the floor. So that's something you don't see so much in teaching with the groundwork that he'd like to see come back. But there's a lot there. There's a
I,
lot to
I
martial
love
arts.
that you have incorporated this into your writing, though, and clearly it's worked for you. As you look through Dan's stuff on his website, if you go to DannyHendrickson.com, you'll see he's an Amazon #1 bestseller. Just last year, won an International Impact Book Award, finalist in the Book Excellence Awards, and just the list goes on and on and on. Readers' Favorite Awards, and you have taken what you know and worked it into your writing, and clearly it's working really well for you. So if someone is watching or listening right now to our podcast, and they think, gosh, I'd love to write a book, what advice would you give them? You're clearly very successful. You've written a bunch of books. You're an award winner. So where do you start? If somebody comes to you and they say, I got a book in me, what do you tell them? Where do you begin?
Tell them to get started. I tell them, just pull out the stops. I mean, to me, the best part of writing a book is the first draft because I'm not worried about style. I'm not worried about punctuation. I'm not worried about anything. All I'm worried about is telling the story to myself. And, of course, over the years, I've gained a little bit more editing ability, but that's beside the point. I say the key to writing is write. You're never going to get good at writing unless you write. And you just keep writing. As long as it's on your computer, it's on your disk, it's under your control. No one has to see it until you're done. So just start writing, get the story down. My very first book, The Good Fight, my wife still teases me about this. She told me that the way it looked on paper was that whole book, like 70,000 words, was like one paragraph, no breaks. And I have a degree in journalism. I know better. But, I was so just interested in getting the story out that I just wrote. Because the first draft is to me is the best part. You just get it out of you, get it on paper. Then the second, third, fourth draft, however many times it takes, that's when the work comes in. But if you just get the story out of you and on paper, that'll be satisfying. And then you learn about the work. But I think people just think, well, I don't really have the skills. I don't know if I'm that, well versed in grammar and spelling and all that. And I don't want to embarrass myself. Hey, been there, done that. You just gotta get it out, start writing, and just figure out what you want to tell. You're never gonna know what your niche is, what your genres is until you get going. You know, and it also depends on, like me, I'm kind of a mix between starting out with an outline and writing off the cuff. I do a little bit of both. Other people, they just write from by the seat of their pants and they do well. When you get started writing, you'll figure out where you're at. Does an outline work for you? Does a basic outline work for you? Does a real detailed outline work for you? Um, I
I
don't
know
know.
some authors, Dan, and I've interviewed probably hundreds down through the years. I've been doing the podcast since 2008. Some of them, John Grisham comes to mind, they treat it very much like a regimented job. They'll go in and they'll write for X amount of minutes or hours, or they'll sit at the computer until they get X number of words out, 2,000 words, whatever it is, and then it adds up over time. Other writers have to have inspiration. They wait until the inspiration comes and then they write. As somebody as prolific as you, have written a bunch of books, where do you fall into that camp?
Well, I kind of have a bit of a schedule. I own a small business. It's a body shop, detail shop, dealership, and I go to work every morning around 7 or so. And I go in and I get the whole place opened up, and I wait for my help to show up, and I get my two managers started, one for the body shop, one for the detail shop, and I go in my office and I try to isolate myself for at least an hour or so, and I write. Okay, so that's my first attempt at writing in the morning, and I get out as much as I can. Other than that, it's just whenever I can find time. A lot of times I have a good couple hours on the weekend, or maybe late at night, I can get back down to my computer and write a little bit. But that's me. I don't really have a set time outside of that time in the morning that I write.
Is there, when you sit down to start writing, you got to have an idea that's come from somewhere.
Mhm.
So how do you know? We all have ideas that come at us all the time for different things. How do you know which ones you're going to develop into a book? Like, do you keep I don't know, I've heard them called tickler file of different ideas that either you incorporate into books or that are possible ideas for books. Where do the ideas come from, and how do you harvest that into something that's tangible and usable?
Well, one of my avenues is, I get very inspired by music. Um, like Brandy, Ballad of a Pirate Princess. Obviously, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl
By
by
Looking
Looking
Glass,
Glass.
Elliot
Yeah,
Lurie.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's, there's a lot of that song in that book. You got the pendant that she was wears and all that. Another song that really inspired me about that book was A Thousand Years. I forget the name of the artist that did that. I listened to that one a lot, and so music helps me a lot in certain categories. Like, yeah, right. This book I'm writing right now. It's called Railroad Man.
Okay.
And it's about Brandy's son, Arthur, who becomes who leaves the Caribbean, fights in the Civil War, has something very tragic happen in front of him during the Civil War. It really affects him. Joins the railroad, becomes gets up high in the executive area of the railroad, becomes like a troubleshooter for the president of the railroad, and he goes to Wyoming, my home state, and he helps with the expansion of the northern Burlington Northern is what it actually became, but the northern expansion of the railroad up into Montana and all the way up into Canada, and that he facilitates that. And it's a love story. It's about him meeting a girl who's the daughter of a sheriff up in Sheridan and all that. And her mother was the only daughter of Chief Pretty Eagle, was a Crow Nation chief, and so I'm trying to develop like a romance between him and her. And like he's kind of an independent guy who doesn't really think about settling down because of the tragedy that happened to him in the Civil War, but she helps him out. She helps him get sobered up, this kind of stuff. And so one of the songs that's been really inspiring me to write the romance part of that book is Stuck on You. I forget the name of the artist.
The
He
old Lionel
does
Richie song, "Stuck on You." Is that the one, or the Huey Lewis?
which
There were two.
yeah, Stuck on You was who'd you say first?
Lionel Richie.
Lionel Richie, yeah, Lionel Richie, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say he does American Idol now.
That's right, one of the judges
Yeah,
from Idol. So
yeah,
you get a lot of inspiration from songs.
yeah,
Interesting. So
music.
and do you start a book and get 100 words, 1,000 words, 100 pages in, and go, this just isn't there, and then set it aside? Have you ever had a false start like that?
Only once.
Okay.
Only once. Yeah, it was I got in about 10,000 words or so, and I thought, now this one ain't gonna make it. I just don't see it. So, but that's yeah, and I've never really experienced a writer block or anything to this point. I mean, because I usually, if I feel like I'm getting a little, blocked on certain parts of a book, I'll go do things that inspire me. I'll listen to music. I'll go for walks. I'll watch movies. I'll do something. I'll read something else, and just usually a little bit of a break and just doing other things helps me get back to my books. But so far, I haven't really experienced anything where keeping me from writing.
The new book is Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean. It'll warm you up on a cold winter's day. Take you south of the border and out into the Caribbean, where the salt air and those warm ocean breezes can fill your senses. Dan Hendrickson is the author, and there are a couple of Brandy books. He's got a bunch of others. You have an amazing resume and backstory. You talked about you've got a background as an investigative journalist. You've got a degree in practical theology. You've done some ministry. You worked in the automotive business. You got this car dealership. How much of your career has influenced your work as a writer, or is it the other way around? You have the work piece, and then the writing piece is the escape.
I think that a lot of the things I've done in my life have really affected my writing. I mean, my dad told me that if you're going to be a writer, you have to go out and experience things. You have to have a vast repertoire of experience in life. And so one of the things, I got involved in the ministry back in the early '80s, and that allowed me to move around a lot. And because, in the ministry, a lot of it's volunteer work. I had to work other jobs. I had to do other things. And I started out with a journalism degree. And so that helped me do some things, but my interest just kept going in different directions. Like for a while there, I tried some law enforcement. For a while there, I tried some, emergency medical stuff,
Wow.
firefighting. So and it's really, having, especially the classes that I've been involved with, all the learning and stuff that, you have to take to get involved in those different fields have really given me a huge, voluminous amount of information to pull from when I'm writing. And then plus living in different areas of the country has helped me too. So yeah, I think that like my work environments really helped me. It's like the Last Enemy series, my first three books. They're all based on some crime that I saw happened when I first opened up my detail shop in Manheim, Pennsylvania, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was these people from New York. They were Russian dealers. They opened up a shop right next to mine, and they were dealers. I wasn't a dealer at the time. I was just in a detail shop, but they hired me to do some of their cars, like clean some of their cars for them. They were
Okay.
only there on the weekend. The sale was on Friday, and then they'd stay Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, get things all set. But then during the week, they'd cars to come in, and they'd sub them out to people like me to take care of them.
Okay.
Like there was a Monday or a Tuesday, about 3 black SUVs pull up to that lot, and we were all working in my shop. And a bunch of guys jump out, and they're FBI guys. They got FBI written on their shirt, and they're wearing camels, and a couple even had rifles. And they go and they kick the door down to my neighbor's place, and they start ransacking the place. And we're all like, what is going on? And the head guy comes over and he talks to us. He says, who's in charge here? And I go, I am. And he goes, do you know these guys? And I go, well, yeah, I've cleaned some of their cars for them and stuff. And he goes, well, they're a Russian mafia outfit that are here smuggling drugs and money laundering, sending money to different parts of the United States through the cars they're selling at the auction. Have you seen any of that? I go,
Wow.
no. And so, I got interviewed by this guy for a little while. He pretty much figured out that we were innocent, but he says, you got to be careful with these kind of people coming into town and doing this kind of stuff. And that was a big scandal back then, where these guys got rounded up and, arrested and all that. But my first 3 books, I put that in the book. That was the crime that was based. I had this like big mafia guy. His name is Boris, and he's in there in Mannheim, and he's got this wholesaling business where he's money laundering for all the crime bosses on the East Coast. He's helping them ship their money to different parts of the country, being untraceable, and even different parts of the world through these cars he's selling. And so that was right from work that story was based on that.
That's pretty incredible. Dan Hendrickson is our guest today on Zoom into Books, the Big Time Talker podcast. The new book is Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean. I mentioned that he's written a bunch of different kinds of books, but they all have a lot of action. They're designed to be page turners. You got an award-winning Western, you got these true crime books, you got the military, historical fiction. Several years ago, Dan, I spoke at an author's event, and I found out that there's a whole genre of literature that is based in and around where you live. There's a whole Amish fiction world, and there's
Oh, wow.
Amish romances and Amish action
Yeah,
adventures and
you
all
know
that.
what? I've seen that. Hmm.
Just fascinating, and I think it goes to your point of writing about what you see around you and sort of having that radar up at all times. And so I have to ask you, with these pirate books, what sort of research would go into that? Immediately, I'm thinking, I need to go to the British Virgin Islands and camp out there and go see things. But you can do a lot online. What goes
Hmm.
into the research for the books that you do above and beyond, the Russian mob having a shop next door to you?
I bought when I was first starting Brandy, I bought several books. The History of the Caribbean, the influences of the Caribbean by the Spanish and the English. And I read a bunch of books about that. I read a bunch of tried to understand, how the slave trade worked in the Caribbean. When did it start kind of imploding on itself? All that stuff, because the slaves were freed in the Caribbean before they were freed in the United States.
Yeah, you said that it was
30
like
years.
35, 40 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 30 years. So, and by the English, not by the Spanish. The Spanish were way later. But so in English controlled territories, I found out through my research, that's where I found out about all the maroon stuff. And so it just kept going, where it just kept building the story. Now, the actual inspiration for Brandy, like I said, was from the songs
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And, my daughters, and just having a female hero,
Do you
instead
like
of
doing the research piece? Is that enjoyable for you? I
oh,
think that
very
would be a
much.
blast.
Yeah, the things, there's so many things that are not in the book, because there's so much. I mean, the history, the whole sugar trade down there in the Caribbean back in the day, was that was their wealth. That
Yeah.
was their, they men became in our terms like billion trillionaires, like, but back then they made so much money off of that
And it's just
sugar
brutal,
trade
awful, labor. I've
condition.
toured some of those
Oh
little
yeah.
sugar plantations, and it was just an
Yep.
awful way for those slaves to make it. Hey, I do want to ask you because it's so prescient for authors before we let you wrap up. The phenomenon of AI and how that is influencing how we write, how we read, how we consume information. Where do you stand as of today, as we, do this conversation on AI?
Well, I'll tell you what, they say you're either for or against it, and I'm against it. I do use prowriting.com to edit my books and also, a couple others. And some of those platforms do offer an AI writing. I've seen it work, and, you know, it's crazy how you can like give them an idea and they can give you like, 3 chapters, just like that. But it's not my voice. Yeah, I could sit there and puzzle over 300 words for a couple of days, trying to make them right, when AI could probably give me 3,000 words in, 5 minutes. So I just, at this point in time, I don't want to use it. And I think it's kind of like, cheating, really, because when I read an author's story, I don't want to be entertained by an artificial intelligence. I want to be entertained by that person's soul, what comes out of them. And I know AIs can imitate your writing style. If you give if you give this if you give the AI all your books, all your writings, it'll examine it, and then it'll start writing like you write, like I write in the third person present tense. So, I could get AI to do, but I've shied away from it so far. I do think it's an excellent tool for editing, though. I do like that. And I know Microsoft Word actually has it incorporated in their whole system where it helps you edit your work. Tells you where to put a comma, tells you that this word doesn't work with that word, stuff like that. That's fine. But to write
Who
the
do you
story
get
for me,
compared to your writing? If do people say, "Oh, this book reminds me of blah"? Who do you get compared to most often?
well, I've been compared once to John Grisham with my book, The Commander, which is a Coast Guard seafaring yarn. And
That's high praise.
yeah, it is high praise. It's like I was a little dumbfounded, because I love John Grisham's work. Um, Louis L'Amour with my Western, I got compared to him, which is a little bit closer to home.
Yeah.
Some of the Longmire series, those books I got compared to him. Now he's right out there in my hometown. He that whole Longmire series was actually filmed in Buffalo, Wyoming, and I'm from Sheridan, which is 30 miles north. And Sheridan's mentioned a lot in the series, but in the books also. In fact, my brother-in-law, who was a Wyoming state trooper, was one of the main consultants for the books, the Longmire. And so when I wrote the Legend of Deputy Jim, I picked his brains too about the biker
Sure.
gangs back in the 1970s, and he really helped me out a lot with that too. So yeah, I bounce around with a lot of genres, I guess. Right. My current editor has been telling me that I should really focus on young adult historical fiction because he thinks that's where I'm doing best. So that's why I'm sticking with Brandy and that kind of stuff right now. But
The through line with those authors like Louis L'Amour and John Grisham is those guys write books for the people.
yeah,
They're not professorial, they're not hard to follow. They're page turners. These are the kind of books you
right,
want to take and it'll take you away. And I think that's, as you say on your website, the fun is in the journey. I love that.
right.
Dan, thank you for being with us today on Zoom into Books.
Absolutely. Thank you too, Burke. Really enjoyed it.
You bet. The
All
brand new
right.
book is Brandy, Dame of the Caribbean. It's the second book in the series. Dan's got a whole repertoire of action-packed books. You can check them out on his website, Hendrickson.com. Don't forget the E,
Later.
Hendrickson.com. That's our friend Dan Hendrickson on Zoom into the Books. Thank you, SpeakerMatch.com, for sponsoring the show. Thank you, Belinda and Kathy and Ashley and the whole gang at Headline Books for letting us crash your party today online. And thanks for listening. New episodes of the Big Time Talker podcast every Tuesday. Subscribe and get them and tell a friend. For my guest, Dan Hendrickson, I'm Burke Allen. Thank you for being here. Now go out and make it a great day. Bye, everybody.